We've talked many times about how the real purpose of Obamacare is a massive transfer of wealth to a few selected individuals. The same thing is true of carbon credits and carbon taxes. And we're going to talk to Mark Morano of Climate Depot about that and about climate change. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you for having me.
Now, you've got on your website the fact that although carbon dioxide has gone up 8%, in spite of their models, we've seen a plateau or actually a decrease in global temperatures for the past 17 years. So their models aren't working.
No, in fact, the theory at the moment isn't working. In fact, if you go back geologically, the Earth has had many times higher CO2 with similar temperatures to today. We've had ice ages with lower CO2. I mean, it is a fascinating to look at. If you look at the recent years, since 1997, 98, we've had no global warming. Put another way, every kid who graduated high school this year has not experienced global warming. Put even another way, kids in elementary school today have only experienced a slight global cooling since 2002. And this is what you call egg on your face scientifically. Well, maybe that's not a scientific term, but you get the idea.
Yeah, but they're all hearing, all these kids in school, to them, the reality is that there's massive global warming because there's been this massive media campaign as well as campaign within the schools to convince them that that is the reality.
What they've done, because reality isn't working for them, and it's beyond global temperature. We're talking no acceleration in sea level rise, polar bear populations expanding. We're talking extreme weather at historic lows with no trends, by the way, actually declining trends in drought over 60 years globally and in the United States. Big downturn and big tornadoes, F3 or larger, historic lows for hurricanes, no trend in floods. Heat waves actually this past year were near 100-year lows. I mean, on every measure, they are failing. And Arctic ice, huge expansion this year. Antarctic ice in the South Pole, record expansion of all time since monitoring began. They can't get a break. But what they've done, the reason they can come out and say it's worse than we thought and scare kids and anyone else who's gullible is to say, well, it may not be that bad now, but our predictions now for 50 to 100 years are much worse. And so that's part of what they're doing is when reality fails, they make the predictions of the future that much scarier. And then they say it's worse than we thought. Why? Because our predictions are scarier. Forget about what's happening now.
But their models don't work. We had a scientist that was actually honest about this. It was on the IPCC. His name is Hans von Storch, and he told Der Spiegel about a month ago, he said, it's not working. He said, according to their models, to have a 15-year period, and actually it's 17 years, where global warming didn't occur with these kind of CO2 escalations, he said there was only a 2% chance that that would happen. So basically, when you've got a real scientific community that's actually going out there and looking at the data, you know, that creates a real problem for them. But they always argue from the position of consensus. They say, well, 97% of the scientists, as they define scientists, believe in this, so therefore it must be true. We've always seen in scientific advances that it was the skeptics who looked at the real data and said, you know, this really doesn't fit the theory. That's where we get our advances, right?
Yes. In fact, it's actually not 90. They claim 97% consensus. Right. And a big part of that was based on 77 anonymous scientists that were whittled down from 10,000. This is how they come up with these numbers. So it's 77 activist global warming researchers who they claim is a 97% consensus. This is what they bandy about for years. And the media will, of course, repeat it over and over. But you made a very good point on climate models. When the UN is honest, when people like Kevin Trenbeth are asked, they will admit they're not even predictions. They're merely emission scenarios. When UN scientists like Jim Renwick of New Zealand comes out, he will say models don't even account for half the variability in nature. Thus, they don't expect them to do well. But they're a useful tool because they can pretty much tune a model to show whatever you want. And exactly. When you're a United Nations activist scientist that you were handpicked by a government to go to these UN conferences where your summary for policymakers, your report, has to be signed off on line by UN bureaucrats and reporters, believe me, your climate models are going to show scary things or you have no business being there. This is a self-serving organization. If the UN climate panel fails to show global warming as a problem, it fails to have a reason to exist.
And we saw the ClimateGate emails a couple of years ago. It's actually 2009, they released 1,000 of them. Then 2011, they released 5,000 of them. And we see them going back and forth. They knew at that time that the data didn't fit their models, didn't fit their theory. Yes. And they were talking about, we got to hide the decline.
Yes, they talked openly about how they could essentially massage their narrative.
Yes.
And what the ClimateGate really showed us was it was the upper echelon of United Nations scientists for lack of a better word, colluding with each other on how to craft a narrative. They openly talked about how to exclude studies that didn't support it, how they didn't like the solar scientists because they were trying to claim the sun had too big of an influence, how they would threaten journal editors from publishing a scientist's work. And right after ClimateGate broke, UN scientists came out and turned on fellow UN scientists saying that the head people should be forced to resign. And they said, by writing these words, we know we may never publish again. This became a good old boys network of scientists getting that $1 billion a day. I don't know if you saw that figure, $1 billion a day spent on global warming. These scientists don't want anything to get in the way of that, but they also are believers. I mean, this is the narrative of their day. This is the science of the day, and it's a politically crafted science. We have our National Academy of Science take money from Congress and then lobby for a climate bill, and then they issue a climate statement as though they're a neutral body. I mean, it's an amazing thing to see how science has been politicized, corrupted, and how a narrative has been crafted through the pressure of politics.
You're right. It's a lot of intimidation just based on, well, this person is an esteemed scientist. We saw this at the American Meteorological Society, had their annual meeting here in Austin, and we went there and there was an amazing condescension towards meteorologists, people who have models that are short-term. They're going out, they're measuring against their model and seeing if it actually works and then making adjustments in their model. And these people who weren't making any measurements or whose measurements were not fitting their model were just condescending towards meteorologists. There was an organization there that's funded by George Soros called Forecast the Facts. And
they
were
go
just
after each weatherman. If a weatherman makes a skeptical statement, they try to intimidate, harass him.
That's
mentioned the American Meteorological is a very good point. The survey at one point a few years ago showed up to 75% of the rank and file meteorologists of the American Meteorological Society were not only skeptical of global warming, but many believed it was an outright hoax. They actually used the word hoax, like the Weather Channel founder John Coleman has used.
Yes.
Because of that, the governing board, and this is how they come up with a consensus, but the American Meteorological Society issued a statement saying they agree with basically Al Gore and the UN. How is that possible? Well, a small group of 24 or so governing board members, the American Meteorological Society, and all these other science bodies come up with a politically crafted statement with leaders that are tied to funding and Washington politics, and they exclude the members. There's no direct vote. There's no direct voice of the rank and file members. They come out with a statement. So you have a group like American Meteorological, 75% are skeptical, but yet the group is on record as being totally supportive of the UN climate view. That's
Absolutely.
how they craft a consensus. It's called total nonsense.
Mark, we're almost out of time. Real quickly, just touch on this idea of carbon credits. This is something that Al Gore has put together with a former partner of Goldman Sachs, the blood and gore carbon credits. Why should we have to pay them? We see that there's not any global warming, but they're still maintaining that that is happening. Why should we have to pay them a kind of religious indulgence? Why not pay you?
Well, what Al Gore did is he had a group called Kleiner Perkins, and they invested $1 billion in 40 different firms. This is back, I think, in 2008, 2009. Well, why did he do that? Well, he was counting on UN climate treaty. He was counting on cap and trade to pass Congress. Gore was a self-serving lobbyist when he testified before Congress. He had the most to gain. This was a man on a quest to be the world's first carbon billionaire. Of course, his divorce with Tipper made him half the man financially he used to be. Or if he hasn't officially got divorced, they're separated. But
I got to stop you there, Mark. We're out of time. I wish we had more time. We're going to have to come back and talk in detail about Al Gore's scheme, because this is something that's kind of like the Federal Reserve, in my opinion, except on a worldwide basis. It's an amazing scam they've got coming up. Thank you so much for joining us today. A great site for information. It's climatedepot.com. Mark Morano.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Well, I wish we had more time to talk about Al Gore and his scheme to become the world's wealthiest man. Stay tuned to Prison Planet TV. We're going to come back to this subject. You can become a subscriber, and you can share that with up to 10 other people simultaneously. Well, that's it for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow at 7 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Eastern.
Stay tuned after the news for more special reports.
Now you can watch The Alex Jones Show live as it happens at Infowars.com/show.
You'll find links to all of our content there and a free 15-day trial for Prison Planet TV.
More than 60 movies and documentaries all in one place at Infowars.com/show.
Many anthropologists and archaeologists believe that before man even discovered the power to harness and use fire, we were involved in agrarian activities. That is, taking the seeds of plants and then replanting them to produce more. The very foundation of our modern civilization and human culture is centered around the planting and cultivation of edible plants.
Here are some of the amazing deals at InfoWars Seed Center at InfoWarsShop.com.
The Survival Seed Vault by My Patriot Supply features only the finest survival heirloom seeds for a robust and hardy garden, even in the toughest times. We also have starter varieties of the deluxe seed packages for fruit, salad, salsa, peppers, medical herbs, and more.
Go to the InfoWars Seed Center at InfoWarsShop.com.
And remember, the revolution against tyranny is growing. Many anthropologists
We've talked many times about how the real purpose of Obamacare is a massive transfer of wealth to a few selected individuals. The same thing is true of carbon credits and carbon taxes. And we're going to talk to Mark Morano of Climate Depot.
Higher CO2 with similar temperatures to today. We've had ice ages with lower CO2. I mean, it is a fascinating to look at. If you look at the recent years, since 1997, 98, we've had no global warming. Put another way, every kid who graduated high school this year has not experienced global warming. Put even another way, kids in elementary school today have only experienced a slight global cooling since 2002. And this is what you call egg on your face scientifically. Well, maybe that's not a scientific term, but you get the idea.
Yeah, but they're all hearing, all these kids in school, to them, the reality is that there's massive global warming because there's been this massive media campaign as well as campaign within the schools to convince them that that is the reality.
What they've done, because reality isn't working for them, and it's beyond global temperature. We're talking no acceleration in sea level rise, polar bear populations expanding. We're talking extreme weather at historic lows with no trends, by the way, actually declining trends in drought over 60 years globally and in the United States. Big downturn and big tornadoes, F3 or larger. Historic lows for hurricanes. No trend in floods. Heat waves actually this past year were near 100-year lows. I mean, on every measure, they are failing. And Arctic ice, huge expansion.
About that and about climate change. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you for having me.
Now, you've got on your website the fact that although carbon dioxide has gone up 8%, in spite of their models, we've seen a plateau or actually a decrease in global temperatures for the past 17 years. So their models aren't working.
No, in fact, the theory at the moment isn't working. In fact, if you go back geologically, the Earth has had many times